All right. Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy episode number 92. And this is the show where we answer your AWS questions. We interview AWS guests from the community and we talk about all things AWS. We are so lucky to be joined today by Brian Hough. Oh, there's Raul. He just popped in the studio. There we go. All right. We've got our full complement. How's everyone doing?
Doing great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Stephen and Raul. I loved the live stream last time, so really excited for to be back again. So thank you for having me.
It's
Likewise.
our pleasure to have you.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I was just juggling a few things and got here just in time, but really excited to have you on board today, Brian. Really looking forward to the conversation. Friday evening here, Friday morning at your end. What's been happening in your part of the world?
Oh gosh. Well, Stephen, we were just talking about this. Do you want to tell about the story you just shared? Because that's like breaking news as of today.
This just happened. Here, let me put this on screen. Let's find the right window. There we go. So Tyler Perry sees a demo of OpenAI Sora and then cancels his $800 million studio project, or at least puts it on hold. That's incredible, right? But it makes sense. As a creative person, if you see all of a sudden, wow, you can create an arbitrary amount of videos and you're about to tie up this enormous amount of capital into video production, right? That would give you'd pause for a moment.
Yeah,
absolutely. But this is amazing. I mean, I expect that this is going to have very long-lasting effects on the investments that either just got made recently or the way investments are going to be shaped in the next 2 or 3 years. Things are changing so rapidly, and big step function changes. They are not even, small changes. If you look at the quality of the videos that were coming out, 6-8 months ago from the LLMs and what you see today with, tools like Sora. And I'm looking at some of the stuff that even Gemini 1.5 Pro is supposed to be able to do, and some of the other tools. It is mind-boggling how things are progressing, in this space.
Yeah. Well, I was just reading some of the details in this article. So it said he was adding 12 sound stages to his 330-acre property outside of Atlanta. But look, thanks to the rapid developments in AI, let's see. Seeing the capabilities, it was mind-blowing, he said in an interview on Thursday, noting that his productions might not have to travel to locations or build sets with the assistance of the technology. That's quite interesting. I just really need to see that. I'll put the link in the description here. I mean, there's a lot there. And it's really amazing, right? I never thought in this show that I'd be sharing an article from The Hollywood Reporter, but there you go. I mean, it's changing. AI is everywhere.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is just, I mean, obviously this is breaking news, right? Because, a lot of money is at stake, but I think even like at a smaller scale, Stephen, I know we were talking about this the other day, just with GPT agents. I mean, the ability to like help get out of writer's block, like that's something that like as a technical content creator, and I also make courses, I want to pump out really great content for my audience, but it's really time consuming to write content that's really good. And especially, let's say that you have an idea, but you want to elaborate on it. Being able to like make an agent to say like, I want to think about something bigger than this. Like what could this possibly, this idea, what could it connect to? So obviously not quite at the $800 million studio level, but as like a small, solopreneur by accident, right? Like that is something that I constantly think about of like, how can I be more efficient? How can I provide the most amount of value? And I've been finding time and time again, AI is the answer. And I had a really great call yesterday with one of my former clients, and I was walking her through all these like low code, no code tools. It's like revolutionary when you show it to somebody and then they're like, I was afraid of the AI stuff, or I didn't get it, or I was fearful. It made me anxious, gave me anxiety. Once you see how it could be applied, like the light bulb went off. And then she was like, oh, I can totally see how this will help me with copywriting or with social media post writing. So we were using Party Rock and crazy cool. So I was able to like show how you could use the app builder, go on and sort of say like, I want a social media generator. I want to be able to have, Facebook, Twitter, X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and sort of help me optimize based upon an input. So it took what, like a minute, 2 minutes, and then it created all of these custom prompts with different boxes. You write one input, and then it generates all of that stuff. So it's kind of similar to the GPT thing, but it built a whole app in like 2 minutes. I don't know what that would
Yeah.
cost at the agency level if you were going to hire somebody to do social media copy or whatever. I mean, the prompts needed some work to be able to make them better, but
Yeah, I think they're about 2 orders of magnitude more expensive to hire the agency or a team of copywriters and editors to be able to achieve the same power or same level as what we are now able to do with the LLMs.
oh, absolutely.
And what's neat is it's not any less personal, any more
Yeah.
than, I don't know, an author using a typewriter or a word processor versus writing it down on, I don't know, parchment and quill paper is less personal. It's still a tool. It's just making it faster, right? 'Cause, I mean, I would guess if you were blindly firing stuff out there without reading it and checking it and customizing it, but right, that's not. If you do that, it'll become obvious pretty quickly, right? You'll tweet something out that says, as an AI model, I don't understand the complexity of blah blah blah, but just using it as part of the process and as part of that iterative cycle, and being able to play with text and to make things happen, it's really really powerful, and to look at things in new ways. I have a friend of mine who he shared with me his blog post writing prompt. And part of it is, give me long tail SEO optimized keywords around this topic, right? And then if you had an agent, you could actually look up current SEO or current trends, right? And make sure to rope in current trends, right? Bring in the Google Analytics API or some other API.
No, I mean, it does make a big dent in the old way of doing things. And like I said, the personalization is absolutely retainable. You can train it enough on your content that you've written up to make it sound just like you, to make, to give the tone, to give the voice or the narrative that you usually take. You can have the same with generated content as well. And it's, on one hand, absolutely fascinating. And I like, my head spins thinking about a million ways to use it. At the same time, I struggle to think, at this pace, where are we going to be in 2 years? Like the time horizon, and try to judge where we are going to be in just a few months or a few years is really hard to grasp. Like, extrapolation is just too hard.
Yeah, I feel like we won't know until it's everywhere. So that's how I feel like you're at the cusp of like the innovation revolution, right? Like we're
Yeah.
so early with this technology, but you can instantly see, like within a matter of minutes, even Grok. Like when you showed that to me, it was like
Oh, yeah.
amazing to see that. It was like once you see that, it's like, oh, the wheels start spinning of how you can
Correct.
use this. But I do feel like it's sort of a like evolve or adapt or perish kind of
Yes.
mindset right now. It's like I use AI every day. And I was very against it. Like literally the beginning of last year, I was so against it. I was like, this is a trap. This is a scam. Like, I'm not going to be reliant on AI. But if you think about it, like we're reliant on our phones, we're reliant on apps,
Yeah.
we're reliant on social media, for
Correct.
business purposes, not even to like scroll on TikTok or whatever. So I feel like at a certain point, it's just how much are we willing to sort of swallow maybe a little bit of ego to say like, okay, this could do it a lot better than I could. But now if you think about it, you're actually empowered to do even better work because you have this AI assistant. I think it empowers a lot of people to do better work, to live their best life, to do their best work for their companies, for their clients.
Yeah.
I'm very
I
pro
actually-
the tech now.
Yeah, I think the way I started rationalizing this is, every one of us is really good at one thing, and that one thing is, I think, for a little while, that one thing might actually be difficult for LLM to meet up in terms of the quality of it. But to do something completely, we have to do 15 or 20 different things, at which, except for that one thing, the 19 other things are things that we are very average at. So as a whole, when you look at AI being able to accomplish something, it's way better at those other 19 things compared to you. And on that one thing, it might be slightly less. But if you can figure out how to leverage it to do those other 19 things really well, then the outcome that you get across those 20 different things to complete one whole big task is phenomenal. Like if you're writing a blog post, you have to ideate, you have to come up with the content, you have to figure out the structure of the content, you have to figure out, the narrative, the tone. You want to talk about, you want to have some sense of humor in it. You want to have, enough illustrations to be able to identify, what is there, if there's graphs, that if you want to put in code snippets, you need to put that in. The one thing that you might really be good at is to figure out who your audience is and to be able to curate all of this stuff. But the LLMs are going to be way better than you on average in doing all the other stuff that's peripheral to what you do. But if your one thing happens to be, oh, I can compose a poem, then that might be a little tricky. So your one thing that you're really good at should be to be the conductor of an orchestra, right? Someone who understands what needs to be done and can leverage all the other AI tools to accomplish that.
I love that analogy. That's so true. And especially something that and I know I spoke to you all about this just on calls and then also on the last live stream, but I've been spending a lot of time to take courses now to really like learn at a much faster rate and use the AI as an assistant to help me learn and scale. But I love the analogy you said, Raul, of the being the orchestra, like, or you're the conductor of an orchestra, because it's, you can learn faster, you can build better. And I've also been using it to sort of check myself. So if I write code, I might want to know, is this the most optimal solution? Is this, especially security? I've been doing a lot more cybersecurity elements with infrastructure on AWS, and I might ask it, I'm writing this function, but how could I provide authentication guards or checks? How can I use TypeScript along with maybe an NPM package or a library I haven't heard of to make sure like the input is sanitized, right? Like if you're working with HTML, or if you're doing like a post request, make sure that actually is post and not another API call. There's
Right.
just the possibilities are endless, and I almost wonder, like, how did I live without this? Like, especially like I was talking about this on a LinkedIn thread. What was it? It was with like a bunch of people, and I was saying about how like I learned how to code. Like it took 2 years. Like it wasn't like a boot camp in 30 days, and now I'm in Fang. Like, but I don't know what it would look like to learn how to code now with AI. I had to do that without any LLM. So for me, but it was never really about like the destination. It was always about the journey. But some people were saying like, oh, like 2 years is really long. And I was like, I don't know, maybe it might be a lot faster now, because I how much time was I spending Googling, Stack Overflowing, like trying to go into documentation that didn't make sense? You find that one colleague that knows everything. You have to not pester them too much, because
Right.
you don't want to be annoying. You have to like, it's like, oh, that's by one question of the month for this person.
Yeah. But I
Now you
think
can
that's where there's a fundamental difference between people who are able to leverage the AI versus folks who, use it blindly. You have to think of AI like a tool. You have to understand what the tool is good at and how to use it. So, for example, I do think that the 2 years you invested in learning the languages is a good thing, because you need to understand the concepts of languages. You need to understand structure. What the LLM is really good at is creating the syntax for you, right? To figure out, oh, what is the syntax for this function? Or is there a pre-existing method in some library that I should use? Or is there a pattern that works well for this particular use case? The LLMs are great at that. And I don't see the point of memorizing all of that stuff. But to be able to look at code and say, okay, this is well refactored. It's broken down into a nice set of functions, and the flow seems right, the data model seems right. You understand the structure, you understand what efficient structure of code looks like. And if you can do that, then that's great. But if you had no idea about how computers work and you went to an LLM and said, give me code that does this, and then you say, oh, great, I managed to get this one thing working. Now I'm going to deploy a production system that's going to manage all my finances, I would be scared. Because I think somebody told me this and it stuck with me. It's not appropriate everywhere, but in this particular case, they said, a tool in the hand of a fool is useless, right? Or I'm paraphrasing over here. You need to understand how to use the tool appropriately. Without that, it's kind of pointless.
I just typed into ChatGPT, complete the phrase, a tool in the hand of a fool.
Did it come up with anything?
Here, let me share this. And then, well, it says, actually, it says a tool in the hand of a fool no more makes a craftsman than a brush in the hand of a monkey makes a painter.
Yeah, I think that's...
But there are some good monkey painters. So maybe, I don't want to diminish the monkey artists.
That's high art.
There you go.
That is elite tier.
Interesting. Hey, actually, I want to take some of our audience comments. And first of all, thank you, audience, for tuning in, for being here on a Friday afternoon or morning, or maybe it is early Saturday.
Late night
for you,
in
or
this
late
part
night.
of the world.
So thank you for being here wherever you are. Really, really appreciate your viewership. We had some great comments. So one question is, or comment, looking forward to hearing great insights from you guys. Thank you again, Vishal, for being here. Really,
I just realized that we didn't actually start on the topic. We haven't actually started on the structure that we said we were going to have for this show. This was just the introduction. But
we're getting there.
We're just warming up.
And then, Brian, this is an interesting one. Will AI end up changing the way people trust each other?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so this is actually kind of funny. So so I've been trying to okay, two parts. So I got a subscription to Masterclass for my parents for the holidays, and they've been loving it. And one of the classes was from Kevin Hart of how to be funnier, right? So you can learn from him how to do that. But I've actually been asking ChatGPT every one-off to be if I was gonna make a funny coding joke, what would that be? Or what would be a not unhinged way to make a joke about this code or something like that? And I've been trying to slowly learn sort of very lame technical jokes, and I feel it's gotten me progressively funnier. But I don't know, if someone knew that I was doing that, would that change how they think about me? If you learn from a person versus you learn from an AI, does that change how you view the person? I don't know. But I feel I'm curious what you think.
I actually don't see the difference that much. I mean, everyone reads books. I mean, there are books about jokes. There are books about, there are tons of self-help books out there. Do you change your view about a person around with self-help? I think I have a different dimension on trust that I care about a lot more, which is that when I watch a video about somebody, or when I hear someone's voice over a medium that's not face-to-face, in person, right in front of me, I will probably in a year or two question whether it was the right person. I might question whether the video is true, because it's becoming so hard to distinguish between the fakes and true things that it's really hard. One of the scams that's going on around here is you'll receive a call and there will be literally no response on the other end, and you just keep saying, hello, is someone there? And apparently they basically use that as a mechanism to record your voice and use that as voice ID in different places. So suddenly now everyone stopped using voice IDs because they can use a sample of your voice to basically figure out, how to circumvent the system. And now you can generate with small samples. You can literally generate anybody's voice and have any conversation. So it gets very it gets a little scary on that front. But every technology, you'll have to figure out a better way to do things. If you thought your voice was a great biometric identity, then now it no longer is. But then we are right now in a society where we jump to conclusions too quickly. Everyone gets triggered very, very quickly, and it's very easy to kind of spread a lot of misinformation as well. And the deep fakes and videos don't make it any easier. So we just have to figure out a better way to circumvent or circumnavigate that that area of AI.
Oh, totally. And like just a 2-second thing, something I've noticed that so obviously like I'm an AI developer, right? So like I get a lot of ads for like, do you want to learn AI or whatever, or like use AI in sales? And I've noticed there's some creators, won't name names, but I've seen like very viral ads where it's like an AI generated clone of somebody, and they're very stiff and their face doesn't really move, and like maybe their hands go up, but it's like not related to enunciating something or emphasizing something, and it feels very fake. And I like don't like that. I've asked people, I said like, and I posted on my Instagram stories a poll, and I said, if you knew that somebody was like, like, would you buy something off of an AI clone versus the real person?
Hmm.
More people like the person. And I wonder too, like, if you're trying to sell the cloned person, like, it sort of makes me think, like, are you trying to cut corners with what you're selling me versus you can just jump on and do like a 15-second recording to like introduce something? I do wonder about that from like the trust perspective, because for me, unless it's like interesting, like it's you, but then it shows AI something. If it's just AI generated stuff, usually I lose interest so fast because
That might be a gap in technology today, like
sure.
the state of video generation. In a year's time, you wouldn't be able to make out the difference.
Well,
That's what I worry about.
I saw some ad for, well, Jennifer Aniston sat down and said that they were giving away free MacBook Pros. You just have to click this link. And pretty sure she's not, right? But if you were just casually, had the TV on in the background and you just hear, like, her voice was very convincing.
Yeah.
Like, unless you stopped and stared and were like, okay, this is imperfect.
Yeah.
I want to comment on the trust part, and then I think we keep going. But Brian, thank you for the question. You've opened up a philosophical can of worms here. I guess I was thinking about, the self-driving car conversation that we had. And how do we trust a self-driving car to, I don't know, say if it identifies, I don't know, suddenly two people jump out in the street and one of them is an important politician and the other one's, a nobody. How do we know that there isn't something in the AI that says, well, I don't know, save the politician, right? Like these classic variations on the trolley problem. And I guess it comes down to, like, in a sense, like morality, or at least ethics, right? Like, you have to know what's the value system. How do you make these decisions, right? And that's how we trust each other, is right? As we try to figure out, well, what's the other person's values, that we can kind of simulate their decisions. And so on the one hand, with some AIs, like, if you're giving it a prompt, you kind of know its values to an extent. But then there's always going to be stuff that you don't know, right? And that's where it brings into stuff like Andre Karpathy's, the sleeper AIs,
Yeah.
right? They could have totally normal AIs, except when you say this one phrase and then it goes rogue. So I guess the question is, how do we know that we trust each other? And I guess that's one of the interesting things about AI, is that because we're kind of treating them like they're human, but they're not. It's kind of, we're reevaluating all of these, like, human to human interactions, right? Like, so how do you know if you trust another AI? Well, how do you know if you trust another person? And you kind of have to make that explicit now, because you're applying it at this enormous scale. Anyway, thank you for the question, Brian. That was really neat. All right, we should get into. All right, we can either make this like a 4-hour live stream, or we should move forward. I'm fine with either. Let's see.
Let's move forward. Because there's so much to cover. Let's move forward. So what are we going to talk about next, Stephen?
One of the things that we talked about was, let's see, we're thinking about the release of Gemini Pro 1.5, and also, I guess, thinking about the spread in LLMs and also the hardware it takes to run them. I use Ollama, so I'm running Mistral locally. I'm running some of the fairly large, like some of these are 40 gigabyte blobs of parameters. You can run some fairly large models locally. So I guess the question is, Brian, I'd love to hear your take on this. From a production standpoint, are people preferring to run things locally and buying hardware? And how do you kind of describe the trade-off of, okay, we can use an open source LLM, or we could use Bedrock, or business chat GPT account, and how do you weigh the different prices and the accuracy, and how do you kind of talk your clients through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this topic too because it's like a lot of exploratory stuff. So I would say the two areas that I really look for are speed and cost. But I probably might rank it as cost first and then speed second because, if I don't want to say like if money doesn't matter, but like if you have a huge tech budget, like you have a lot of money to throw towards tech. Like the company is investing a lot in infrastructure, so they can bear the cost. Like and the biggest learning lesson I had was when I deployed Llama 2 and I was running that on SageMaker. That was going to bill like $5,000 a month because it's like this huge server. It's doing a lot of processing. I mean, that's like almost like a full-time employee at your company. So that at a base minimum, like I wasn't even running, I think I was running like the 7 billion one. It wasn't even running like the largest model that they had at the time because you would need an even larger server. So I was just experimenting and I had a lot of credits to burn. So I was like, oh, like let's just go ham. So when you like if budget is not an issue, right? You could be looking at things like EKS, you could look at deploying endpoints through SageMaker. If you have a really fine-trained use case, and usually a lot of companies that have been historically doing something for a really long time will know how certain something is done. They have a lot of context. They have their own internal data models. You could use that, vectorize it, throw it into model. You could use RAG. You could train with like, any sort of like supervised, unsupervised, hyperparameter tuning, whatever you want to do for that model. If you can afford to do that, but that also will take you a long time to get it right. So that's kind of where like how the cost blends into speed. I'm usually telling people like, check out Amazon Bedrock. They have an amazing API toolkit. It's very easy to run that in Python, JavaScript, run that in Lambda functions, run that even like client side if you had like an internal tool and you want to run that like on server side rendering, like you could totally do that. I just feel like Bedrock, OpenAI, even like Hugging Face transformer agents, you can just like plug these into a Lambda function and then it'll run. If you're doing a lot, like millions and millions and millions of stuff, you're going to need to have a designated server. Probably want to go Kubernetes route and deploy that. Like I've seen with like Fast API, with EKS, or like the SageMaker endpoint use case with like API gateway. So that's kind of what I think, because I'm really advising a lot of people to go the serverless route. But it's also because if you don't really, I don't think if you don't know what you're doing, but if you haven't been doing AI modeling and that type of stuff for a while, this serverless stuff gets you started. And I know getting to market is really important for a lot of companies, especially even like large enterprise companies where they want to ship a product, they want to implement AI really fast. Amazon Q, you could have like your own chatbot. Bedrock, you have your own API suite. Even I've been using MongoDB vector store, being able to like store your vectors in their database. There's also, you can put vectors into Dynamo now. There's so many use cases for serverless. And it's just, I sometimes feel like a lot of companies, they want to have like the really intense architecture because it's like, oh, this is significant. But what's more significant is the value output, not necessarily like how it's configured. It's more of like you have to configure it with Kubernetes if you're doing this, but you shouldn't, I don't think, like think about, oh, how could I use Kubernetes in this use case? You should think like, what are the best tools I have available that will give me the least cost for the most amount of value in the quickest way possible, securely.
Yeah.
So I guess to summarize, and I know I really, really enjoy this about you, is you really you take a huge view of things and you have to know what's out there. So that way you know what choices are out there to make, right? So if you are a AI developer, try it lots of different ways, right? Try lots of different models. You've probably used, how many different LLMs would you say you've used?
Ooh, probably like 4. I try not to like go too crazy into like the experiment stuff. Like I've used Llama a lot. Llama is great. The OpenAI stuff. But yeah, probably around like maybe like 4 or 5 different models. But then I'll like experiment with stuff. Just like in production, I'd probably recommend between like 4 to 5, but definitely under 10. Like around 10 that I've experimented with. But getting them into production, I'm usually like selecting a couple that I really like.
Okay, so if I could summarize, it is try to do serverless, or even try and use something higher level like Amazon Q to get started, right? Where you can just get started with an AI chatbot right away. In the long view, you probably will have some dedicated hardware or not dedicated infrastructure, and whether that's an EC2 instance or something that you physically purchased, maybe full of NVIDIA cards. However you do that, you're probably going to have more and more dedicated infrastructure, but try and start in the simplest way possible, which ends up being serverless and like a managed database.
Yep.
So till about a week ago, I think I shared exactly the same view, and that's probably what the worldview looks like. But it was kind of completely blown. I was blown away by the conversation around Grok that started at the World Government Summit last week, and Grok did something that is absolutely mind blowing. Number one is if you haven't tried out Grok, you should. And I believe it was Chamath from the social. What is the group that he runs, or the org he runs? Social Collective. It's basically an incubator. And he's an investor in Grok. He went ahead and interviewed, or there was a Twitter Spaces or X Spaces conversation with Jonathan Ross, who is the CEO of Grok. Now, Jonathan Ross is the person who created the Google TPUs and then moved on to start this company called Grok. If you experience at grok.com, put in a query, see how fast it is. It is absolutely mind-boggling. At 500 tokens a second, you get instantaneous answers. Now, after seeing that demo, when I started thinking about what my decision framework for choosing either the model or the infrastructure, earlier I was actually I was trying to balance many different dimensions. I was trying to balance content and accuracy. Then I was trying to balance cost. I was trying to balance privacy. And I was trying to balance speed. And yeah, let's do a quick demo. Let's go ahead and put in a prompt over here. There you go. That was 300 tokens per second. And it brought in that whole list in 1.25 seconds.
Okay, so I put this in here, this parody. I was talking about it with my kids last night because I remember I took Daphne Kohler's probabilistic graphical models class on Coursera like 10 years ago. And I was trying to answer this question with probabilistic graphical models. And it involved, loading up a chunk of Wikipedia in, triples and learning the RDF triples and trying to use probability to infer, is this entity a song, and learning all of the Wikimedia Foundation's semantic structure and all that, what do they call that stuff? The semantic web, right? Is this article talking about a song or an artist or this?
Yeah.
And I hacked on this for like 2 weeks and I didn't really get very far. And it just crossed my mind the other day as we were listening to Weird Al while we were driving. I could do this in like 2 seconds.
Right.
And it'll always work.
Correct. But yeah, so like I was saying, the decision-making framework now with something like Grok, where they are rethinking the way your hardware is going to be deployed to actually run your LLMs. The one thing that I'm starting to realize is that price is only going to go down as there's more competition. Like, I don't understand pricing model for Grok. If I just look at the cost of each of the processors and the way they've laid it out, I would think it should cost a bomb, but they've offered it at a very, very competitive price to every other LLM that's out there. And one thing that stood out for me was in one of the interviews, Jonathan Ross talks about speed. I think this was on CNN last week. He said, speed is literally the only factor that matters when it comes to engagement today. He was talking about some stats where he said on a desktop, if you lose 8% of your audience, if you are 100 milliseconds, for every 100 milliseconds, you lose 8% of your audience and their engagement. And if you are on mobile, that's 34%. And I thought those numbers were shocking. And
guys, everyone, let's speak faster.
Oh, we'll be here for 4 hours.
All right, thank you so much. That was a really interesting insight. No, that's really good idea, Ro. That's I like that. Wow.
Yeah, but
Yeah, it makes
you do
sense.
lose, and it makes sense. It's the way all of our web browsers and the way our web technology has been driven to drive every millisecond out of the latency of stuff that's coming in, right? And that I think is critical. So I think costs, you need to stop worrying because all the costs will balance out in the medium to long run, or you will get a competitive rate no matter what because of competition. Latency and speed is all that will matter. Accuracy, pretty much all the models are getting to be good enough or getting to a very similar level. And here's the other very interesting thing. I found that if you're okay with a little bit of latency and you ask a very rudimentary, LLM a question and you ask it to improve itself 3 or 4 times, you will get to the answers that some of the best LLMs give you today. So with a little bit of trade-off, you can even work with some very rudimentary LLMs. That said, I think one of the other insights that came from some of the conversations with him were, it is this the smaller models don't have enough world knowledge, and the real power of AI is in that world knowledge. They might be good at in a very narrow use case where you have your data and you only wanted to use your data, work on and operate on your data. That's totally fine. But if you wanted to marry world knowledge with your data and be able to, truly be an assistant or an agent, you need those larger models. And I don't see, unless there's a big breakthrough in, local compute, how that stuff comes locally. So I think moving with serverless is still, I think, the best idea. Have someone host a service that provides, with these capabilities. I think the inclination to host your own is going to disappear sooner rather than later, with the way things are changing and the way these new pipelines are being deployed for inference. So you might still use them for training, but for inference, I think custom hardware is probably going to go away. You're going to have custom hardware from companies like Grok and Meta and AWS that's going to be able to serve 10x, 100x more than what you would want to do locally on your machine. Like, I think you'll start seeing this big divide in capabilities between the very large models that are now going to become 1 trillion parameters and above, versus what you can run locally on your hardware, which is going to be what, 20, 30 billion max?
Well, yeah, no, that's yeah, I think that we'll definitely see that divide moving forward, especially just at the cloud scale. Just to answer one of the viewers' questions. Thank you, Daniel, for submitting the question. Brian, are you familiar with Chat with RTX?
Oh yeah, I saw the
NVIDIA.
chat. Hey Daniel, I'm actually not, but I know other things by NVIDIA, but I haven't heard of the Chat with RTX. But it sounds cool. I'm gonna look it up right now.
Yeah.
I guess the only advice I can give is there's a subreddit called Local Llama, where a lot of folks who are enthusiastic about running LLMs locally tend to congregate, and you see a lot of people showing off their GPU rigs there. So that would be, I think, the right forum to check. Yeah, look up the Local Llama subreddit. And yeah, thanks for asking the question. All right.
Yeah, it's something for us to look at as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's switch gears into LLM agents. Now, Brian, you had recently posted you had a really cool use case that came up with LLM agents, and love to hear more and just kind of talk through how you solved it.
Oh yeah, totally. So as a content creator, I want to be able to write blog posts and then have code snippets or screenshots and the things that you would expect in documentation. So I use Squarespace as my website base, and it works great for like 99% of the things that I needed to do. And then basically everything else, I'm writing like my own custom code snippets, my own code blocks. My site basically is now like pretty much all custom code, but the ability to have that with like blocks, you can like structure those together, super great. The one thing that the blog was lacking was the ability to have code snippets. And you see that on, blog platforms like dev.to, you see that on Hashnode. All of like the AWS documentation has, little snippets, and you can like even copy in the right hand corner. So I was thinking of like, okay, like I've always had this as like an insecurity about when I write blogs, because then I'm like, I have to write all this like really gross, text. It doesn't look like a code block. So I ended up writing over the past, I think it was like a month and a half, this like 500 line code snippet library that I just like put, in like how CDN is deployed. And then I'm able to like make little scripts that then can create the code snippets, and it works awesome. And then I was working for like my Python stuff, my JSON, my YAML. If I do like CloudFormation, I want to, show what I'm doing, until I got to trying to render HTML. And this is the whole thing of like, you're using HTML to render HTML in a script that also has scripts, and it completely broke the code snippet. So then I was thinking of like, okay, a lot of stuff that I talk about is front end, because you have a front end for a back end. So of course I could always visualize the back end stuff because you're not executing Python. It's just listing what the string is. But I couldn't do any of the HTML stuff. So I was thinking of like, okay, do I need to like rewrite all this code? And I don't really know what to do. So I was asking ChatGPT, and I said, I have this code snippet library. It works really great. But whenever I have divs with scripts and style, it completely breaks the structure. Like, can you help me understand why this keeps happening? And then it goes, oh, well, the issue is because you need something called HTML entities. I'm thinking like, oh, like, tell me more. What are these HTML entities you speak of? So it explained to me, how you have to escape all those characters that would execute the code, because you're running divs inside of a script. So it would execute that normally, which is a default behavior. So
Yeah.
So then it showed me actually how to replace it, and then you use these escape characters instead of the caret. So it'd be like this characters, div characters, da 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 da, and I was thinking like, okay, this is great. This solved one problem. This is kind of like that thing of like, you solve the leak in the faucet, but now there's like 10 other leaks, because now I'm thinking, okay, I know the solution, but what if I had like, I don't know, 50 lines of code? I have to do that for every single instance. And then you can't always do like replace all, because sometimes it won't apply contextually, and
Right.
you have to like make sure that whatever. So I was thinking of like, okay, like now I have 5 more problems after I solve this one. So then I was thinking, wait, couldn't I just make a GPT agent that could basically take as input my code block and then just do this rule? So I structured my prompt where, I give it a context of like, this is who I am and this is what I'm trying to do. I gave it a persona of like, you are a software engineer that will be reviewing code. I then gave it example for context. So I showed like, this is an example of a type of input that a user would send. Here's the expected output in like 2 minutes. And then it works. So I use that now for a lot of the times where I need front end now. So if I have like front end code, I need to make a code block, write the code or get it, whatever, throw it into my GPT agent, and then it'll just process. And honestly, the prompt engineering part of it is like prompt engineering, but the writing of the prompt, the instructions, was the part that took the longest out of everything else of like deploying it. Because now I use that in ChatGPT, and it's like pinned in my list of GPT agents. Incredible. This is saving me hours of time to do this. Like, I was able to just blast through all my old blogs, create new code snippets. I don't know how I would be able to do this, like, realistically, as like a solopreneur content creator, if I didn't have that as a tool. It completely revolutionized my ability to now generate and show code on my website. It's incredible.
So what is even more incredible is if you actually pit agents against each other. So this is something that I got very fascinated about a few months ago. So for example, in your use case, if you had one agent that actually generated all of these snippets, you could have another agent that renders it, and a third agent that checks whether the rendering is correct or not. And then each one of them provide feedback, and that feedback goes back to the first agent. That agent corrects the code. You have the full loop and the full check. So I have a lot of these. I have teams of agents where I am also a member of the team as a human. And if you use a tool like AutoGen, it's one of the tools that Microsoft released some time ago. Sorry. You will find that it's really easy to put together a team of different personas, and you can all be in like a chat room where each one has their output that's, that comes up in a common chat room, and then each one can comment on it or can provide their expertise to enhance the work product. And you can do the same. You can also add your comments to whatever work product is being created by this team. And that process I have found to be absolutely fascinating. Like the kinds of stuff that I've been able to do in minutes, I probably couldn't think of doing, in 100 years. Like it's night and day, the quality of stuff that you can do, things that you want to brainstorm with somebody about some topic. You want, you can create a developer, a tester, product manager as three different personas, and have them work with each other to go create a product. It's fascinating what you can do when you have these set of agents working together to do something.
Oh,
And you
100%.
can be the moderator and a manager and say, no, here's what I prioritize versus something else, and you go work on this particular thing. You can moderate those conversations, which is really amazing.
That's awesome. And something that actually being able to get this started for my blog got me thinking of so I'm working on a UI for myself right now. So it's a Next.js app, TypeScript, and being able to switch between Amazon Bedrock, GPT. So I'm going to be using like a 3.5 Turbo and then Hugging Face Transformer agents. And I'm going to try to see basically like which model is like the fastest versus the one that writes the code correctly, because that's something where like as an engineer I feel like I always try to think about what's the fastest way I could get something shipped right with the least amount of cost. So that was like GPT agent and chat GPT, and it works great. But now I'm sort of thinking, could I now run maybe this as an API call? So when I write a blog, could it ping an API that looks for the code snippet, tells me like what the code is or something like that? Or what I'm working on right now is just like a text area, and I just throw it in there, and then I would see sort of 3 different outputs of what each model is outputting. So that's something where I feel like it's get the solution out the door, but then you can also now experiment. Like once you get something that works and is stable, right? You can also then get something that could I make it a little bit more automated? Like, are there complicated use cases where if I had a lot of code, does one model fail where another one would be needed? So that's what I'm working on right now is using again like those kind of serverless API calls. For something like this, I definitely don't need to do like train a model on it because a lot of the LLMs are like trained on code generation. But for me, I'm thinking like speed too. So is one model really fast to do this as opposed to another one? Or if I threw like a whole block of code, will that like basically fail? Too many tokens. Is there another model that I could use that would be more willing to like allow generation from that? But that's like the fun part. It's like get the thing out the door and then experiment. But sometimes it's like we get caught up in the experimenting and we don't actually ship. And that's something that I'm working on a lot right now, specifically with clients, but then also for myself of thinking like not letting very good be the enemy of perfect, like, or don't make perfect be the enemy of very good. It's like, get the thing that you can get out the door, but then use time to experiment, to QA test, resolve, issues. So
well, I think you're touching on the subject area that I'm really, really was excited to hear about, which is when do we build and train a model? And I guess we have a couple different ways to use, right? We can use a pre-trained model, or we can build, at the extreme end, you can build your own LLM if you are a very well-funded company, or you could fine-tune an existing LLM, or you could just focus on the prompt engineering or use a RAG. How do you see as the lines that demarcate when you do which?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know. Actually, could I screen share some of the Jupyter Notebook stuff
Please.
that I was talking about? Okay, cool. Because I think that it's like a good example to show how kind of like what like all the cool stuff you can do with LLMs. So this is stuff that I've just been like playing around with. All right, let me screen share. Okay, and then
Yeah, because that's a tricky question. Why you're getting the screen share up? Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, perfect.
okay, can you see it? Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I can show like a couple of things. So I've been playing around a lot with like coursework and then with my own experimentation of like different use cases. So I was using like, OpenAI, right? Scroll down to like some interesting stuff. So, you're using like GPT 3.5 Turbo. So these are all calls. So, for example, right? Like being able to do, take some code and then explain the code out, right? So this is something that you could just do in ChatGPT. You could do with like an API. So let's say that we wanted to do like something a little bit more complicated. So if we scroll down, yeah, so like if we were like doing toxicity. So this was kind of interesting. So this was a use case where we were basically trying to find like is code, like is the text like does it have toxic words in it or not? So basically if you send code out, right, this is not toxic. So it knows that like Python code is not toxic. It's like you're not saying like, bad words or something like that. So I was trying to think about like if you had like if you had like Gen Z phrases. So this was really interesting because I was like, oh, this code is so bad it has like brain rot ick, or like it's giving like stupidity or something like that. So it was interesting that like it didn't pick up on any of that. And I was talking to the TA Hugo from my course, and I was like, why is it not picking up on these things? Like I think so it got like dumb because you shouldn't say that. It's like not a good word. So it picked up on that, but everything else it like didn't pick up on. And I was saying like, why would it not understand? Like, isn't brain rot like wouldn't that not be a good thing? And he was saying like, this is where if you had a use case where a lot of your users were using like Gen Z phrases, you would want to use Urban Dictionary, which they actually have an API for. Download it, and actually it takes a really long time to like download it because it's so many words. But you would then use that to train your model to know what these types of words mean, so that you'd be able to train it on being toxic. So this was like a great example of like, these serverless APIs can probably, do all of this stuff. This is where like you would need to do this more manually. But if you had a use case where the model was failing and you could afford to train this model, because sometimes some of the models that I was training, it took like an hour and a half actually to like do this. And, we're burning through these credits like pretty quickly. So there was that. And then let me just show some other stuff that was kind of cool. So go scroll up. Oh yeah, so we're doing like native fine tuning. So we're using, this was another thing that was interesting. So we were using Facebook OPT 350, which is just a pre-trained transformer LLM. And then we're using this Open Assistant Guanaco dataset. So it had like different words with different translations. So you can kind of see here, this is like lots of different, words translated from different languages, different stuff. So I was like doing all this stuff. We did all the training. That's all the output. So what I was trying to find out was basically like, could the translation work? So I had this one like translate English to French. Hello, how are you? So it does that. I don't really speak French that well, but I assume that that's saying like that correctly. But what was interesting was when it had English to Spanish, it didn't know. It was like another language. And I kept trying to say like, oh, maybe like Espanol if it understands that. Then it was like repeating back in English. So that was where like a lot of these like the models can fail you. But the reason why is because if we go to English, let's see if they had it here. Where was the output? It was under files. It explained the languages that it was trained on.
I think I saw something upwards where it said it was trained on mostly English text. There it is.
Yeah, there.
Predominantly English.
Oh, yeah, but it's like the reason why it doesn't know this is because it wasn't trained on search. There was a list though. I wonder like where. I don't know if we have time. I'll share a link and maybe in the chat, but it might even be like in the paper. If you check this out. But anyways, there was a reference to how like the language wasn't, or the model wasn't trained on Spanish. So even though you have this as a data set, it's not enough. I was talking about this with my TA. There's not enough context for this to tell the LLM all these different references of Spanish, all the different contexts. So even something super simple as like, hi, how are you? it didn't know how to do that because it wasn't trained on how to do that. You think like if you hadn't taken class on how to speak a certain language, if you had like an hour tutor, you're still not going to be able to speak the language. It's kind of like that. So this was a great exploration too of where like could you afford to then train a model on something. That's kind of where like again the speed and the time and the cost kind of come into play here. So if you have time to experiment, this would be a really great use case to find like an even bigger Spanish data set, and then you train the model on that. But if you can't, if you don't have the time for that, then you'll have to use a lot of these serverless APIs, which work great. But that's sort of where I was noticing that there was sort of that disconnect of you get this foundational model from Hugging Face open source. It's great, but then they need a lot of work to get to where you would expect it to work on many different use cases. That was just trained on French, so it works for French. But if I want to do other languages, that's where now we need to like train even more and even more and even more. And that's where you get the model size increasing. So now it would be more expensive to run as it's getting larger.
Okay, so I guess that brings me to another follow-up question is, okay, so say you're building this toxicity detector and you've got these people using English in more creative ways that your model isn't picked up on, or maybe they're saying toxic comments in Spanish and you don't have a translation for it. Whatever the case is, how are you monitoring your model to know that you're missing this?
That's a good question. So you have to be a practitioner of your own technology. I very much believe that. I don't think that you can build in a silo. You really have to understand what you're building and who you're building it for. And I think you also need to do a lot of QA, because I've noticed that it's getting the infrastructure up, but then are you tracking it? And a lot of things could also come up with PPI, like personal information and detection like that. You might want to implement monitoring and logging. I know Datadog has been doing a lot of really great work with getting sort of a toolkit and a dashboard for specifically working with OpenAI. But Sentry is also another one for monitoring and logging. There's a lot of important requirements that monitoring and logging can help with, but it's like if you're not doing it, then you really don't know. So I think you have to be logging stuff at a certain point, eschewing all of the personal data about your users, but being able to see snippets, or at least you are the one that's doing it, and then you log your own outputs, and then you're not necessarily logging what users are putting through your technology. But it's important to know what the outputs are and what the inputs are.
So I guess you're saying don't do this blindly. Still have a look, and I guess ask your users for feedback.
Yes.
See if this is working or not.
I think having your sample data set definitely, or having your user inputs start acting as a sample data set definitely makes tons of sense. But one of the areas that I found LLMs to be really good at is, like I said, pit them against each other. So if you have a QC agent, which is also an LLM, I think you manage to check or cross-check the validity of answers a lot better, and you can do it at scale. So for example, you don't need to use the same LLM that you're working with to test the same LLM. I mean, that would in certain cases even defeat the purpose. But you have so many options available right now. Like you might actually use Llama to actually run your product, and then you might use Claude 2 to then validate whether the answers are reasonable or not against the question. And then you might use a third one to ask questions about how could you make it better, or is there a way that this could be false? There are ways to ask counter questions. It almost always reminds me of the psychometric analysis, where across the test the same question would be asked 4 times in 4 different ways, and I don't know exactly what they measure, but I always had this thing that I wanted to make sure that my answers were consistent as much as possible, even though they were asked in 4 different ways. So I think you have to start thinking in a very different way when it comes to testing these systems.
Totally agree.
All right, I know we're getting short on time. Do you have a little bit more time, or how are you doing for time?
For you,
I do.
Stephen and Raul, I have time.
Oh, thank you. Well, because we really want to. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I guess thinking about if you were starting with LLMs, I know that prompt engineering is a big part of this, and as silly as it sounds, right? You can tell the LLM do the same thing but do a better job, and that works. What are strategies that you found? How have you built up your prompt engineering prowess over time? What resources do you use, and what's your general thinking of when you're making a prompt, how to do it?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I started doing this when I was looking. So I don't know if any of you follow Ali K. Miller. She's like former
Yeah.
Amazon. Yeah, everybody knows because she's
Yeah.
like really big in the AI space. So she's been putting out a lot of really great content on the context that makes really great prompts, and it made me really think about when I'm talking to an LLM, giving it like a persona. So it's either like it's the persona of the person that's like the input person, or like how I want the GPT to assume a persona. Also the context, understand like the assignment. You want the LLM to know what it's supposed to do, like specifically giving it context, and then specifically say task. So I'll sort of do that. I'll do like context, I'll do persona, I'll do task, I'll do examples. And I sort of structured out in those 4 formats when I'm making prompts or when I'm, hitting different APIs, because it also helps me to sort of think about it more as like an algorithm or a formula than just haphazardly writing a bunch of code into like, a prompt input window. Because I found that if you can get really standardized about this, and another thing that I've also used is having templates. So you sort of have, like your, context, your persona, your examples, and then a template. I've used that a lot for agents. So you sort of say like, I did actually this, so kind of cool. So I wanted to know for our live stream last time, I wanted to get a summary of what we talked about. But then I told my agent and I said, okay, I wrote a Python script to use the YouTube API. It basically takes all of those the captions and then it turns it into a CSV file, which is like, we love Python because it can do these things, and the APIs and PyPy that are great. But I was able to like get the CSV file. I then drag and drop that into my GPT agent, and then the template will say, give me a short, concise summary of this transcript of this video. And then I say like a minimum of 3 sentences, maximum of 6. And then I have like make a longer summary that has like a minimum of 3 paragraphs, but a maximum of 10. And then I said, like, if you were to make YouTube chapters, what would be the subjects? And I've used that as a strategy to dissect big blogs, big YouTube videos. Because then what I'm able to do is get like, okay, give me like the short instant example, give me a much longer summary that I can like, dig into a little bit more. And then give me like I don't know if this is like Gen Z millennial, but it's like, give me like the TikTok like hooks. Yeah, it's like
TLDR version.
Yeah, like the TLDR version, right? Like give me like boom, 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 boom. These are like the 6 things that would be like chapters in a YouTube video about what we talked about. And like it works like that, and it works so great. But then I can replicate that same type of prompt format across anything that I do. But I'm also curious, like, is that similar to what you guys do? Is that super unhinged? Like, do you not do that? I'm curious.
Yeah. So I think it helps that I have kids who are between 5 and 10-year-olds. And what I've come to learn is you have to give and define instructions as if you were doing this to a 5 or 10-year-old. Okay. And for me, the prompts have gotten a lot more complex because more often than not, I use them in the context of a RAG system. So there's tons of, material where I not only, I actually think of context as one massive background. If I think of my 6-year-old, I think the retention span of context for my 6-year-old is about 10 minutes. Every now and then, of course, he'll come back and tell me something that I told him like a year ago, and I'd be completely shocked. But he very strategically figures out when to say what. But in most common circumstances, if I ask him to do something, he's going to have the memory and a context for about 10 minutes, right? So
what is that in tokens?
In his world, maybe less than 1,000 tokens. So just considering the fact that now the number of tokens that is available to you for context is ever increasing. And by the way, now with Gemini 1.5 Pro, it offers 1 million tokens, which is absolutely mind-boggling. you want to provide it as much context as possible. Now, the context, I break it up into 3 different sections. The first one is instructions on what it needs to do and what it needs to output. The second part of the context is it becomes important to make sure that all the other context, which is data that is going to be useful to process whatever question or instruction you've asked it to do, is in a manner that is easily receptible to the LLM, right? So for example, if you're using RAGs, the context that you bring up should not be absolutely broken sentences, like bring up a paragraph at a time or bring up the relevant context. Make sure that when you're calling stuff from the RAG, you've got the relevant context, not some other random context. So you want to build all of that stuff up kind of the right way. So the second part of my context is the RAG context that you bring up, which is all the background, all the private information that is not public knowledge that the LLM already knows. You bring that up as part of your processing. And the third part of it, which is also equally important, is the personality, the tone, and the constraints. I think constraints is a better way to describe it. What are the constraints that you want the processing to apply? And that is in 2 forms. One is good examples of things you want, and bad examples, things you don't want. Sometimes you might give constraints like, when I ask you to rank something, or when I ask you to score something, then there are questions about, how do you define the entire ranking scheme? Are you going to give it 0 to 10? And if you're doing 0 to 10, then give a good example of what 0 looks like, what 4 looks like, what 6 looks like, what 10 looks like, right? So that it has a good understanding of what the scale is. Or you make it kind of the inverse, where you say, this is going to be a 0, this is going to be a 1, then it becomes a classification problem where all it's trying to do is trying to map whatever its output is going to be to a particular class that you've defined as hey, here are 5 classes, put it in one of these 3 or 5 categories. So those are the 3 basic components of the context. And now with the context windows being so large, I mean, you have the opportunity to put in as much information as you possibly can to get the best output.
Yeah, I love that how you talk about the constraints, sort of like have it know what it shouldn't do, because sometimes it can help to even just like prevent like bad responses or bad outputs and just have it check itself. I found that that's good. And something also that I've noticed too is when you're sending data back from the API, sort of having like a filter like over the responses can be really helpful. Even like filter inputs. So like you obviously think about like PPI, but like also being able to then like when the response gets sent back, can it filter over certain things to make sure like if someone shouldn't have access to certain types of information, that would be like removed from the response output, or if there was like data about something that it shouldn't. Obviously, it shouldn't have created it in the prompt, but always having those before and after filters can just really help to make sure that your response is sound, because you don't want someone to get a response and then it's weird. Because Stephen, you talked about that where like ChatGPT went kind of wild, or was like pretty unhinged responses.
Yeah, apparently, this is earlier in the week, it just went. It was generating this kind of gibberish. It was really strange. If you look up this article here, I'll put this in the comments, called "ChatGPT has lost its mind," and it was based on a parameterization issue that has luckily been resolved. Yeah, you've got me really thinking about prompts. So, I guess, what prompt has surprised you in terms of its effectiveness, or I guess more like strategy? Are you surprised when it works, or I don't know?
I've been fascinated by what good prompting can do. Like, I have had use cases that, unfortunately, because it's all IP, I'm not able to share. But the kind of things that I've been able to do with good prompting, I couldn't actually expect a human being to do. Like the skills that the LLMs have with great prompting and with a few iterations thrown in of the LLM working on itself, the kind of output you get is what I am constantly surprised by and constantly motivated by.
Yeah. And I remember when I did my YouTube video, it was like what surprised me was I was asking Llama what to make recipes that didn't exist yet, or like come up with like a really unique way to cook something. It was coming up with like if you go on like my YouTube channel, like you'll see it came up with some like very like I feel like this is like kind of like it's like bougie West Coast like very like kind of have like the is it gastronomy or like food science? You have like those very kind of like very fancy, very like unique food science recipes. They came up with stuff like that, and then it also was like have it be very creative. It'll take a lot of liberties to create like if you really you'll bump up the temperature and you like really let it like go ham, it will generate like very creative things. So it could be like very like dark stories or very like light and fun stories could be kind of cool. Like if you're a parent, you could like read your child like a story that doesn't exist, so like it's like a cool thing. So I love that. That is what has surprised me. It's creativity, but it also can be very unhinged. So you have to really be cautious of like the outputs. So that's where like you really need to be monitoring what it's doing, because if you have if people are expecting code generated outputs and then it starts saying this is some code, but like here's a story about once upon a time, and it like goes off to like some other direction, then your users are going to be super disappointed because they're going to be like I'm paying for this application and I want code outputs. Why I want code snippets with HTML. Why am I now getting like a bedtime story for like a 2-year-old or like a 5-year-old? That's the thing where you like I constantly think about that a lot. And Raul and Steven, you both were saying this. It's like we need to use these tools, but we also need to have human in the loop. We need to make sure that we're constantly reassessing how we're using these tools, because we can't just trust them wholeheartedly, because you still need to be a reviewer of what you're creating.
Yeah, I think that you need to have a review process. I'm not entirely sure you need a human reviewer all the time.
True.
I think that's the distinction I would make.
Well, I put the link to your YouTube channel in the comments.
Oh yeah, thanks, Steven.
Which is the recipe video?
Oh, it's the Meta Llama 2.
Okay.
It's towards the end of the video. I can
we can post that in the video comments, or if you post it in the link, we'll put it in the chat. I wanted to ask one more question, and then I think we should call it for the day. What do you think about vector databases? I mean, I know that's another part of putting AI into production. And how do you think about when a client says, okay, well, I've had this happen before with, okay, we've got Microsoft SQL, so everything has to fit in the Microsoft SQL paradigm because we've already paid for it. Or how do you, like, what tool would you use if it was totally greenfield versus adapting to existing tools? What's your choice there? How do you make those choices for vector database?
Yeah, great question. Oh, by the way, I dropped the link in our chat.
Perfect. I'm posting that now.
Okay, sweet. Thanks. So the vector database that I've really been enjoying using would be Mongo. They have so MongoDB, they have a vector store. That's worked really great. It's very, cost efficient. It's very easy to use. I've really enjoyed that. One thing that I've really been looking at more into is, I'd say, like the uses of why you need RAG. So like for some use cases, right? Like Amazon Q, very cool to be able to like throw in your own data, and then it's kind of doing these things behind the scenes, and then you can like talk to it, or you can use it like in API calls and all that stuff. That's been very cool, because it's like I feel like Mongo is great for, I have an application and I want to use RAG, I want to update stuff, versus like I want to have like a chat bot and have it sort of be this package solution, and then I would just deploy that. So I've really enjoyed. Yeah, I've been using those two. I have dabbled with OpenSearch. It is very expensive though. So that's kind of where it's like if you know you need it, it is a very good tool. But I saw on Twitter, like I think Luke from like AWS here, he was saying how like you're looking at like minimum 700 a month if you're like running that in production and everything. So it's, again, if you can afford that, and OpenSearch is, working with what you need, then I'd say go for it. But so much great, utility with things that already exist. And I do think also sometimes you don't necessarily need RAG. I think some people throw it around as like a buzzword of like, oh, we need to get RAG in this. But what if you just constructed your prompt so that it was pulling like certain data? Maybe some of that is client side, maybe that is like from a database, but it like puts it into the prompt, and then it's you have just like some data in JSON, and then you just pull that into the prompt, and then you send that to the API. It's like, unless you have like a lot of data, that's kind of where you're using RAG because you don't want to spend the cost to fine tune it, because that would be cost prohibitive for you. So RAG is a great process to not have to go down the tuning route. But sometimes also like vectors can be a little bit like, do we need vectors? Versus could we just pull in some context, throw it into the prompt, and then throw it up to the LLM?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. And in general, I think I did, other than cost, there isn't very much of a differentiator between the different vector data stores. But one thing that I've come to realize is, if you are going to do RAGs, then I find that a large number of RAG use cases are short-term and temporary. Like, you might, for a certain operation, for maybe 10 minutes, you want to pull in data from a massive data set. But then you'll never look at that data set again. And then the next time you're coming in, it's transactional in that sense, right? So it makes sense for a use case like RAG. And in almost every one of those scenarios, creating an entire collection in a different data store, all of that makes it's hard. And I have usually tended to just default to ChromaDB, which is the SQLite of the vector database world, right? It's sitting on your file system, very easy to build for a one-time transactional thing where you're loading up a whole lot of stuff from a whole lot of files. And particularly in that case, what happens is that you have data sitting in lots of different files and lots of different data sources, and then building connectors to actually pull out structured JSON and things like that is not easy. If you could just dump all of that data into a RAG and say, you go figure out how, what the entities are, what the metadata needs to be, and how it's going to be vectorized, then it just makes life simple to pull that out in a reference. So I found that in 90% of the cases, I just end up using ChromaDB as a vector data store. And then in a few cases where I actually truly need persistence, then either MongoDB, that's a great choice. If it's a very, very large data set, then I'll use OpenSearch as an alternative. But that's rare. I've not usually come across a scenario where you're doing this for massive context.
All right. Well, this has been a really fun stream. We've talked about prompt engineering, philosophy of trust, and how to handle AI agents in general.
And we have not stuck to any part of our structure that we thought would be more informative and educative. You get us talking about AI, you'll wander all over the place with it.
I think we actually did pretty good. We covered agents. We talked about building versus fine tuning, monitoring. I think it was just an organic flow to it, which is good.
We got some Jupyter notebooks in there too. And we talked through where training fails or where it succeeds. But it's the journey, like gotta love the journey.
So Brian, where can we find you? Where are you present? Where are you putting out your content? We got your YouTube channel. What else?
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, you can find me. My social handle is Brian H Hough, Hough, Brian, and then middle initial H. So you can find me there, pretty much on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. I just batched like 7 videos for YouTube, so I have content for like the next several months. So I'll be posting a lot more. But yeah, that's kind of where you can find me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram specifically.
Awesome. Okay, so LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. And we got an awesome comment, which I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with. Very creative, and that was from Lucy Rofis. Cool. Thank you. That's awesome. I 100% agree. Brian is extremely creative, very inspiring. I really appreciate your enthusiasm, your energy, and your huge
Great.
wealth of knowledge that you've shared with us.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much once again, Brian, for coming on the show and partaking in this with us. So thank you so much, and we hope to have you back on the show for another episode. This is always fun.
So
to do,
fun.
so I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. I always feel like I learn so much whenever we talk, online or offline. So, and I love the content you all have been putting out, especially the live streams. I love the content. It really expands like what I think about tech. I'm like, oh, I need to like check this out because like Rahul and Steven just talked about this. So the content you're putting out is so helpful for the space, and especially for people like me that love learning. I just like eat that up. So it's a pleasure to be on this show, and I love that you have these shows too. So thank you.
And thank you so much. That's really heartening to know.
That means a lot. Thank you.
It's mutual. Thanks a lot. Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend, everyone. And thank you, listeners. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix is AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost-saving opportunities and not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the button to start saving now.